Welcome back. I'm glad you've joined me today because we actually got to have a great chat about Total War. The most recent DLC has dropped, but this is not really just talking about a DLC. The overall context here is extremely important. So, Creative Assembly's relationship with their players essentially totally plummeted, and this is from a few different things. Number one, there was shrinkflation with DLC. If you've heard about Shadows of Change, basically, it was less stuff for more money, a big mistake. Total War Pharaoh was essentially a glorified expansion to Troy that was sold to us as a full-fat, like actual big historical Total War game, which it transparently wasn't. There was then Hyenas, which was a extraction shooter that they were doing with their console team. That was then shut down. There was a load of spicy leaks to make just for a really tasty story, frankly. And there's also the parent company Sega, who divested from Relic, which is one of their RTS studios, and had 240 layoffs, mostly at Creative Assembly. This all basically means there was a lot riding on today. And the reason I think why this is its own video is I took a look at the Thrones of Decay launch numbers. I saw a really large spike and I thought, right, something is happening here. Players are coming back. I think we need to analyze what's up and have a bit of a chat about that. And if you would like to support us in doing that, well, you can go to bellular.games. Over there, we publish Loading Screen every single day. That is our newsletter. So you basically get to find out all of the news, including the things that don't make it onto the channel. You also get our videos ad-free and as early as, like, literally as soon as they're rendered, they go up to members immediately. So sometimes that's a few hours, sometimes that's a few days earlier. We do our best there, and a bunch of other stuff. So a big thank you to everyone who supports us there in this current time of plummeting CPMs and just general, honestly, kind of chaos in the ad world. It is massively helpful. Thrones of Decay, that was memed to be called Thrones of Delay, it has launched, and you can see here a player spike of 66,608 people. That is a pretty damn healthy number, but when I looked at it, I thought, okay, well, this number only really makes sense in the context of other numbers. So I took a look at Shadows of Change, and man, this basically tells the entire story. Shadows of Change spiked to 34k players, so you're essentially seeing this DLC have double the spike, and that is for numerous reasons. So Shadows of Change was a weak DLC that was overpriced. Everyone was talking about it almost exclusively in a bad light, but also the baseline update to the game that came along with it, it just didn't really have that much. Now, to get another data point, we can take a look at Forge of the Chaos Dwarves, which had 73.8 thousand as its launch peak. That's just a few days after the launch. Now, this is really relevant to me because this was a full new race, a new faction being added to the game, and that is a lot of work, and it's also an extremely clear marketing beat. If you like Chaos Dwarves, there you go, you can play them now. So I think it's really no wonder that it did well. Of course, Shadows of Change was basically the same price with way less content, and I would also say content that wasn't as well positioned at the player base. Definitely another part of this most recent DLC that we'll have to talk about. Then the other thing to take a look at is the launch of Mortal Empires. This is the thing that stitches all of the game maps together, and really for most people, this is the actual Total War Warhammer 3. The Chaos Realms campaign, honestly, it kind of blew. It kind of blew, and even from the leaks that happened a while ago, this includes people like directly emailing me and saying, hey, when I was working at the company, on the lower levels, we all tried to tell them that the Realms of Chaos campaign was basically going to be a miss, but they didn't really listen. A bit of a strange thing. This you could almost call the true launch of the game, and it's just shy of 200k players. So obviously this most recent DLC is not getting that kind of number, but again, that's not really a shocking thing. And to do a breakdown of the overall numbers, you can basically see that this peak is the largest that they've had since April, and April was when the Chaos Dwarves came out. So there certainly is a lot of player activity around this, we can say that, and that does mean that we should take a look into it. So the next thing to do was to take a look at sentiment. And you might notice this is a bit strange because it's not one thing, it's actually three things. And when you go through the three of them, what you basically find is between 90% and 92% in terms of the Steam user score. That's obviously correct as of me speaking, now. That could change, but the initial sentiment is good. Then taking a look at the overall game, you can basically see, well, overall reviews, mixed. The most recent reviews, however, are very positive. You can see a spike of 150 positive reviews, and yes, there's a spike of negative reviews, but it is nowhere near as large. Fairly noteworthy, I think. And even before this, you can see that it's just slowly accruing positive reviews and not that many negatives. And really that's because at its core, it's a pretty great game overall when you're taking like everything from the 3 Warhammer games together and you're stitching them into one map. It is a really strong player experience. So that shows that essentially what they have here is something that's really good. And those spikes of negativity, well, number one, this game had a really rough launch. That explains the first negativity spike. The second one is Shadows of Change. Shadows of Change was obviously more than just a DLC not being what people wanted. It basically represented the overall existential fears of that player base, and those were really quite severe. So, with that said, let's talk about what's going on then. So there are 3 DLCs that together are Thrones of Decay, and the way it works is you can purchase each one of them separately. It's £7.49 per pack, £19.11 for all 3 of them, and because it's done via Steam Bundle, that basically means that if you buy one of them, you're still going to be getting the discount to like complete the set. This basically then means if you do not play a faction, like if you just fundamentally do not want to play Nurgle, even though the new Nurgle character is pretty cool, if you don't want to play that, you do not have to buy it. With all of the previous DLCs, Chaos Dwarves not included, but like if maybe with Shadows of Change, you just enjoyed the Changeling, right? Like the Changeling character mechanic. You couldn't just buy it. So fundamentally, I think that this is better. You are not being, you could almost say, forced into buying a bundle when you only really want one of the parts of that bundle. Now, the overall context here is honestly fascinating. They, Creative Assembly, were getting fundamentally worried about their unit economics, and they essentially decided we can't really grow our player base, we've got to make more revenue per user. How the hell do we do that? The initial thing that they tried to do was shrinkflation. That obviously hasn't worked. Now, overall here, the prices are still up, right? So it's not like this is some sort of humongous price-cutting fire sale. However, while the prices overall are up, you can spend less money to get only what you want, and the overall positioning and content of this DLC is substantially just more aligned, I think, with player interests as compared to the previous one. So let's get into that and just talk about what the paid content is. So for Nurgle, we've got Tamarkan, the Maggot Lord, as the new legendary hero, along with 5 new units and 3 regiments of renown. And of course, like any good DLC legendary lord, he's got his own mechanics. Essentially, if you want to go and like recruit a whole bunch of mortals and kind of be doing like Nurgle plus mortals, big rampage, that's kind of what you're doing. I will admit, I have literally never played Nurgle. It was definitely one of the factions that didn't really get as much attention or as much love. I don't know why. Like, I think the Nurgle minis in the game are really, really cool, but I suppose it's just not really been my thing. Now, what is my thing is gunpowder and shooting. I love Napoleon Total War. And for the Empire, well, they are really targeting me particularly well. So their legendary lord is Elspeth. She is riding around on a dragon. That's all pretty cool. And the core with her is a focus on magic, yes, but mostly gunpowder. So as somebody, of course, who really loves Napoleon Total War, in my head, Sharp and the boys from the 95th Rifles, they're just going to be fighting vampires and demons. That's pretty good for me. So there's the Gunnery School and Amethyst Armory, which are the mechanics that are going on there. And there's also a new legendary hero, 5 new units, generic lord, generic hero, and 3 regiments of renown. And even just like looking at the Marienburg like battleship thing, that just looks awesome. So as a player of this game, this is actually a really, really good example of their new DLC strategy kind of working for me. I am interested in 2 of the factions here. I'm not really interested in Nurgle. That does mean that overall I should be able to spend a bit less money. Or at the very least, if I decide to go and purchase, Elspeth, which, being real with you, I probably will, because I actually do love the Total War. Well, I really like the Total War Warhammer games. I'm more of a historical nut, but maybe that just explains why I want to go around with gunpowder. But this is a good example. I can go in, get an experience that I want for, a smaller amount of money, and if I then feel, okay, I've played enough Warhammer, I'm going to just leave this game for a while, I could come back and purchase Dwarves. But I'm not kind of locked into having bought everything. I think that's just really, really good. To move on to the dwarves then, right. Focus on artillery and slayers. The slayers are basically dwarves who are mad lads who have replaced their armor with testosterone therapy. They're very roided up and pretty cool looking. Their legendary lord is Malachi. You get the Thunder Barge, which operates a bit like a horde. So I remember playing a little bit of Vampire Coasts back in Warhammer 2. What you basically have is like the Thunder Barge as a almost you could sort of describe it as like a movable settlement with its own like upgrades, recruitment, and things like that, and it can even be present in battle. So he can do that, gives him a lot of mobility in the campaign map, which then also pairs quite well with the adventures mechanic thematically, where you're basically just going in quests for upgrades and gear. It looks really fun, and it's got 5 new units, a generic lord, generic hero, and 3 regiments of renown. But there's also the free content, right? The free LC, so this is all coming along with patch 5.0, which is a lot better than the patch that came with Shadows of Change, which maybe could be a part of why the player numbers have been pretty good this time. There's a rework to Karl Franz, there's a rework to Balthazar Gelt, who will be starting off in Cathay, there's a Nurgle faction rework as well. They're changing up things like the plague system and the economy. The Dwarves are getting a bit of a rework, I think specifically some of the grudge system. There's the Nemesis crown, which I was watching a Great Book of Grudges video about the overall DLC. He described it as being similar to the Sword of Cain. The one that you'd be getting if you're an elf in like Warhammer 2. A little bit like that. And then there's a legendary lord, Epidemius, who I almost pronounced as Epidermis, who will be the Nurgle character, and he's essentially just got to focus on spreading plague everywhere. Only is available in Immortal Empires, which does make a lot of sense because Realms of Chaos, I would love to see individual player numbers for that, but he is a free legendary lord, so just everyone can go and play that. So, to me, that is all looking quite interesting. It's targeting like very core factions like Empire and Dwarves, those probably in like my top tier list of things that I'm naturally interested to play. So I definitely feel like this is well positioned to me as a player of this game. Like ultimately Creative Assembly's challenge here is, can they reactivate their lapsed players? I can say that as a lapsed player, the positioning of the content in this DLC combined with the entry point for me being, £7 something, that is really working very, very damn well. But we got to talk about the out-of-game context. So obviously, Creative Assembly were hit by layoffs. I believe per legend, he was saying like about 160. Our understanding is that it was mostly from Creative Assembly's UK offices, with Sofia being less impacted, which obviously makes a lot of sense. It is going to be cheaper to do things in Sofia than it is in England. And of course, that's in addition to the entire Hyenas team being chopped. There's then the future of Total War. And again, like I've been playing this franchise since Rome 1. It and World of Warcraft have been two constants in my gaming life. So if you've ever been, a bit confused, like why does he talk so much about like Total War on a variety channel? It's close to me. What can I say? Now, the leaks are kind of interesting here, and they do have to be taken with a grain of salt. So Legend has got interesting leaks. First up, Total War 40k is in the works. He had then heard that the next Total War game is between the 17th and 19th centuries with a large global scale and naval battles. It may be in early 2026, but then later on, he heard basically it's World War I and is significantly delayed. So he's kind of hearing things from different people. Some of it overlaps, some of it doesn't. And he's probably in a bit of a situation that sometimes I find myself in within World of Warcraft, where you can hear a lot of things and it's interesting to see what actually happens, what remains in the cutting room floor, and just kind of how you manage that kind of thing. Why I do listen to Legend specifically on that is there's a lot of times where you will hear things from your sources that will inform how you talk about the game. You won't always be able to say directly, because in this case a source won't really be going on record because they would lose their job if they did, but it does kind of mean that we can try to balance our coverage with respect to what we know. So because of that, I do listen to him. Overall, the idea that it is going to be 40k and then World War I, to me, that is extremely exciting. World War I is particularly exciting to me because it represents a fascinating part of military history where, it is the great big battleships. So people think about, say, the likes of, even to go in the Second World War, the Scharnhorst and, obviously the Bismarck, named after you know, the big bear himself. Well, they're kind of this era of battleships that just, it's not really a thing anymore. Really, the advent of the aircraft carrier, and then of course the advent of the fancy things that we have now. It just kind of means that, like, going about in, like, big sort of dreadnoughts, I mean, to me, hell yeah, that's a take on naval combat that I would love. I think the First World War is an absolutely fascinating setting because it's almost a transitionary period between the sort of like 18th, 19th century European order and really a lot of the world that we live in today. I think it's a fascinating period of history. And to me, that would just be a hell of a time in a Total War game. And I suppose as well, there are plenty of mods, I believe, for Napoleon Total War that have shown that really this thing can sort of, you know, it can be good, right? That setting. So I'm extremely down for those things. Per legend, the plan basically is 3 to 4 DLCs after Thrones of Decay. He actually does claim to know 1 or 2 of them, but didn't want to spoil it. And I think that is a fair and reasonable thing. Ultimately, whenever you have maybe more sensitive information like that, it's a bit of a case of like, what is the good of just spoiling something that is in progress if it's not necessarily newsworthy to an audience. So maybe there's interesting things going on there. He very much seemed to believe, though, that after those DLCs, it is going to be very rapidly into 40k. Personally, I'd be interested to see how 40k could go. I can imagine absolutely humongous units of, you know, Tyranids, like Imperial Guard, right? But maybe smaller units, like 16 or so with Space Marines. Anyway, that I would be totally down for as well. I'm personally more interested in 40k than I am in fantasy, but I do like them both. So a quote from, just 2 quotes from a video that he did. The first quote is, all the stuff Games Workshop have allowed them to make, they've made. That's talking about the current Warhammer Total War games. And I suppose the idea is that once Warhammer 3 is finished, then it's basically, here is Warhammer Fantasy translated to Total War. And he then said, all my sources consistently report 40k is coming and sooner rather than later, which again makes a lot of sense. And he also believes that management had been asleep at the wheel for a while, but a lot of those people are gone/rotated out of their sort of areas of responsibility. So that is the update on what's happening with Total War. Where am I personally? Well, trust is a journey. It's not just a data point. So I want to see delivery because here there is a strong unification between this being good and their incentives. Because if this is bad, it's completely gone. However, they need to keep up having a strong delivery essentially after this. They absolutely do need to do that because trust is earned over time. You do not get it by one good release. If they can do a good job with Warhammer 3, bring us something quite new and exciting with World War I, maybe 2025, 2026, as Legend is suggesting, and then are able to do 40k, I think we will be in a fairly good place. Consistently, people have said that one of the things that CA have struggled with is growing the Total War fan base. 40k is going to do that. 40k will grow their goddamn fan base massively. I don't think there's any question about that. 40k is going absolutely, you know, to the moon. And real talk, as much as everybody was talking about, oh, you should have put your money in Tesla years ago. Yeah, fair. But if you put your money in Greg's, the UK bakery, and in Games Workshop, you'd have a pretty penny. Let's just put it that way. So that's it for today. There will be another video today, in fact, if all things go to plan. So stay tuned for that. Thank you for hanging out with me, and I'll see you again shortly.